way to gain independence as a child to have our hair braided.
The braids would come up right here, stop, so all the braids would be hanging like this. That was like my favorite style.
If you add all of the hours I spent getting my hair braided as a child, it probably sums up to 5 years of my life.
You're straight up stealing. That's not yours to take.
The first memory of braids would be as a young girl sitting down in between my mother or a family member's legs for them to braid my hair.
Or I would get barrettes put all over my head, and we called it bubbles.
Everything that I was exploring as a child, my hair was always about locking and twisting and rattling hair and tying it up, getting the roots twisted, shampooing the locks.
Put your hair in and it looked decent and you could roll around in the grass and still go to church on Sunday, you know?
I was just so determined to learn. I would go to this girl that was like the best braider in our town. You know, she was nice enough to teach me how to braid, and I just kept on practicing on my friends, and I would take the stuff to school and braid in school and braid after classes, and I would stay like braiding the teachers and stuff like that.
Your homegirl braided your hair. Sometimes they would, add hair for length. During lunchtime, my friends would be taking my braids out, and I'd wear like the crinkly hair and rock that all day.
I did my first set of individuals on my own head, and it took me 3 days. 3 straight days. Like, I only stopped to eat and use the restroom. That's it.
One of my homeboys, he suggested a young lady to do my hair. I go look in the mirror. The 2 braids, like, it was uneven. Like, this one was a little closer to this way, and this one was going a little back. So I was hurt, man. And, the lady had a nerve to say, do I need to fix anything?
Getting our hair done also becomes a celebration of who we are and a part of our identity outside of what you actually look like when you leave the salon. There's so much that you can do with black hair, whether it's straight or twisted or braided. It's so beautiful and it's so malleable.
You might have someone who's doing a fishtail braid, which is just one big braid in the back. You might have someone who's just doing 2, as we call them, French braids, right? And then when we think about cornrow style technique, it gets really complex.
Cornrowing, as we know it, is a very African thing, centered more along the parting and the design of where the braid is going, more so than the braid itself.
We found a statue from 500 BC Nigeria where the hair was cornrowed. And we found this whole world of weaves that were not called that, using all these materials in different societies throughout West Africa. It's almost like your social security number, meaning you could look at someone's hairstyle and you could determine where they're from, what their status is in the society, if they're married, if they're single, if they're a widow, if they're a warrior, if they used to be a soldier. The richer someone was in a society, the more fanciful their hair was.
And if we look throughout the diaspora, that's been a way in which African women have expressed their own kind of beauty politics.
A Senegalese hair braider might have a very different braiding technique than a Nigerian hair braider might have versus a Brazilian hair braider.
On slave ships, one of the first things that was done was that someone's hair was shaved. If hair was thought of as like a social security number, I can look at you and say all of these things about you because of your hairstyle. Suddenly, people have shaved heads. There's no visual way to say you're from this group and you were this person in this society. And then when the enslaved people were here in the US, there had to be a completely new hair culture that was born out of people from all of these different groups who did not have the materials to actually take care of the hair. During slavery, Sunday was the day that was set aside where you could actually do your hair. It was a time where actual grooming rituals were born, and also a way to figure out how to care for hair that could last for an entire week. You weren't going to be able to do anything until the next Sunday. The 2 main hairstyles that came out of that were head rags and also cornrows, because someone else can do your hair for an X amount of time on a Sunday, and then you're good for the rest of the week.
When we think about African American women during enslavement, the covering of their hair was something that they had to do. Not until much later do we see African American women participating in a beauty culture for the United States, affirming who they are, whether it be pressing their hair or braiding their hair or locking their hair. There's a cultural kind of aspect where young girls or older women go to a place where they find a sense of community. And they also think about the ways in which they affirm to the world that they love who they are, they love the color of their skin, that they love the beauty products that they use. And so people like Madam C.J. Walker and others created a way for African American women to be businesswomen, for some of them to get out of the realms of domestic labor. And so that's the economic part of Black women's beauty.
If you go all up along the East Coast, you'll see populations of African women from Senegal, from Ivory Coast, from Nigeria. In many cases, it's out of default that we have these businesses open because they unfortunately are having difficulty breaking into other areas, because a lot of the women might be very well educated in their home countries. But when you come here, often the opportunities are limited. And so this skill is one way to create income.
When I moved here, I probably had like $3,000. In like 5 months, that was done. I was so broke. I was like sleeping on the floor on a friend's apartment. So that was the point that I was like, oh my God, I would really have to go back. Like I had nothing. And then I just started running into clients that were my old clients from the island, and they were like, oh, I know this shop that needs a braider. Dominicans, they show me so much love out here. It was a wrap. Like I was flooded every day.
Oh, Dingy's the truth. You know what I mean? If you didn't know, you better ask somebody.
I kept practicing, like just doing different family members' heads, and by the time I got to like the 7th grade, I was charging $25. And you could come to my house on Friday and have your braids done by Saturday. So it still took a day, but it was okay. And it was only $25, so you can't beat that, right?
And I would charge like $10. $15 was like a crazy design. And everybody was just coming to my house.
I've had clients since I was 11 or 12 because my mother couldn't do my hair. So it was like, do your own hair, go to your aunts. If they're not available, you either look crazy or you figure it out.
Sunday afternoons, my mum was braiding my hair and it was torture. I didn't enjoy the experience. And I said to her, the polite version, that I didn't like what she did. And she said, if you don't like it, go and do it yourself. I was like, of course I'm going to go and do it myself. So I did. And I went on my own request and started learning how to lock and twist on the mop heads, on the tassels, the fringing on the carpet. I learned how to blow dry with a broken hairdryer and a fork. And that's how I started to get the texture and work it through.
I did have a lot of times where braids was like the last resort, like the only thing that I had to fall back on. I would have had to have called a client in order to pay a bill or things of that. So I'm so grateful for the talent. It's gotten my family out of a lot of tough situations.
The freedom of being able to say, this is my business, this is my culture, and not have to kind of assimilate to American norms.
For Black women in particular, however we look, we are not going to look like we're white, which is always going to be what the ideal is in pop culture, in the media, in political debates and political conversations. And everywhere you turn, the ideal is based on something that we do not look like.
Historically, we had this whole melting pot idea that people were going to come here and preserve their own cultures and function and be active citizens in the U.S. But part of that was the requirement or the undertone of you're going to assimilate to work in our particular environment.
During the Great Migration, as a lot of Black people were leaving the South and moving to northern cities, braided hair on adults was seen as this country, old-fashioned way of styling hair. And the idea is that if you're moving to the city, you wanted hair that looked cosmopolitan and sophisticated. And for women, that meant straight hair. So there was a moving away of braided hair because you didn't look cityfied.
A lot of that has to do with, in our contemporary context, of why we see there being kind of real consequences for African American women who wear their hair in braids or wear their hair in locks or decide to do any other style that does not conform to a Eurocentric standard of beauty.
The first time